Hello and welcome to Asia Tech Podcast. We are on a tour of the Asian startup ecosystem. We're out to find the who's who in the startup ecosystem. Now, we all know about the startups. We know that they are out there, they're doing their thing, but who are the people behind the startups? Who supports that startup ecosystem? Who builds the platforms for those founders? We are now talking to accelerators, funds, co-working spaces, the unsung heroes of the startup ecosystem. So I'm really pleased that we are here today in probably one of the lesser known vertical sectors of the startup ecosystem as well. We are here in the cyber space, particularly in cyber security. And I'm with Nicole and Anton from Cylon. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So Anton Opperman and Nicole De Silva. Let's talk a little bit about yourselves first and your background, and then we'll talk about Cylon. So, as I understand it, you're Singaporean, Nicole.
Yeah.
So what's your background? Did you come from the cybersecurity space?
Oh, actually, no. I started my career out in banking. And then I worked for a local tech series, pre-series A startup in Singapore before joining a non-for-profit for women entrepreneurs. And then landing up in Cylon, helping with the program here.
Great. So do you consider yourself an entrepreneur or?
Well, not really. I think of myself as someone who likes to help companies grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're the program manager here in
Yes.
Cylon. Okay. So we're going to ask you about how the program works, what kind of startups you get in and so on. Okay. So we'll go there in a minute. But first, sitting to myself, onto my left, Anton Opperman. Mm-hmm. You have an interesting background. You are from, well, we're trying to dissect the story a little bit off air there. Originally from South Africa.
Yep.
And then?
A bit of a mongrel. So grew up on an African game farm. Then was in the UK, 16, 17 years out of London and Europe. Worked across Europe. And then spent the last 6 or 7 years after that based out of Australia, Melbourne and Sydney. And then I've been in Singapore for about the last year. Okay. Started in technology, banking technology, and then worked for a startup based out of Melbourne for 3-4 years. Then worked for a big company called a tech hub called Stone and Chalk out of Sydney. Mm-hmm. And then followed my wife over to Singapore about a year ago and joined Cylon.
Yeah, so you're the MD here at Cylon in Singapore.
I'm the MD in Cylon Singapore. We also have an office in the UK, but this is a Singaporean registered company, and we run it from from Block 71.
When did you guys set up here in Singapore? Because you came a year ago, but was it running before you came? Or?
No. So effectively, the I-71, which Cylon's part of here, kicked off in March of last year. So 27th of March 2018 was the official launch of the Cylon involvement or the I-71 or the cybersecurity ecosystem here in Singapore.
So almost 1 year.
Almost 1 year. We like to think we got a heck of a lot done in that last year.
Yeah, you have to. So 11 months in, be interesting to know what you've learned in the process. How many batches have you done so far?
We're on our second batch at the moment. Yeah. So we've had, our first batch was 5 companies in Singapore, and our second one is 10 actually. We doubled the number of startups we have on board.
Yeah. Okay.
Importantly, that's on the accelerator side of things. Where Nicole's right, we've had 15 through now. We also run 2 boot camps. So the boot camps are just week long. If you're somebody out there who works, in industry, or maybe you've got a PhD, you're a PhD student, and you think, wow, I wonder if I could take this idea and start a company on the back of it. So we run these 2 boot camps. Well, we run 2 every year, just for a week long. And you basically sheep dipped. You go from your idea, by the time at the end of that week, you will know whether you've got a potential company.
Right. So these are for people very early stage, at the idea stage. I'm not yet ready, but I want to explore the possibility.
Exactly. And it's incredible because everybody knows they hear about innovation labs, they hear about accelerators, right? But these boot camps, they've really got like fertile ground. We've had, I think, 46 people now who've come through them. They're really intense, right? They're 30 hours of, like I say, sheep dip. But on the back of them, a handful of people have actually left their companies, their existing companies, and started companies, which is great. And ultimately, we hope they're going to go on the accelerator. But we've also had tremendous interest from places like Australia, Taiwan, India, who want us to run these same boot camps. In fact, they will send delegates over here to attend these boot camps. There's a real hunger or need for entrepreneurs out there who they've got a great idea. They just don't know how to start a company.
And what are the sort of characteristics of the people that come to your boot camps? Are they corporate dropouts, so to speak? And I mean that in a very good way, because many of the best startups we see come from that category. People who've done 10, 15, 20 years in corporate. They know what's broken. They're not changing the world. They're just fixing a problem. Or are they sort of those sort of 19, 20-year-old Stanford graduates in shorts?
You know, it's an excellent question, that, Graham. When we kicked off the boot camps here, because I did a similar thing in Sydney, Australia, I was expecting to get 50-50. So 50% would be those bright little buttons straight out of uni, who thought they could become the next Zuck. But here in Singapore, and particularly in cyber, it's vastly, vastly different. Of the 46 who've come through our boot camps, I would say probably only 4 or 5 are from academia. And of those 4 or 5, there was only one who was an undergraduate. The others were either running, research departments, or they were running innovation labs at the universities.
Right, so 90+% of your
are deep
cohort.
People who have 10 to 15 years experience.
Right.
And it's interesting, they're not just people who are fixing things broken in their work environment, to get to your original question. They're actually people with super, super, super smart ideas.
Right.
So I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. We had a guy the other day based out of Curtin University in Perth, Australia, Western Australia, right? They use these massive telescopes and complex mathematical models to work out the origins of time, right? So this is, you need a brain the size of a planet. Honestly, these are really, and the Australians are really good at this stuff, and Curtin University in particular. These PhD students, they're experienced, they're in their late 30s, early 40s. They want to use this technology now to interrogate the dark web, to find people who are doing naughty things on the dark web. How far out is that?
Yeah.
It's just amazing. It's just incredible. Similarly, we got some guys from Waikato University. Exact same thing, Waikato in New Zealand. The farming industry, the dairy industry in New Zealand is a really, really big deal. If the milk, the percentage of whatever chemical in the milk changes even fractionally, that 500 million New Zealand dollars dairy farm would just close down, right? Because nobody buys the milk, you know all the scandals, etc. And they've got deep, deep technology to try and protect that industry from people, because it's really, really easy just to add some chemicals to whatever in the milking process.
Oh, yeah.
So you get to see some really fascinating ideas coming out there.
So these are people, we talked about the fix, obviously, but these people with some really interesting ideas that they tend to be, they have to have had 15 or whatever years experience in an industry to know it so deeply that you don't want to bankroll their education here. They come with all that knowledge, right? So
particularly the guys who come on the accelerator. The guys, generally the companies who come on the accelerator, they know what they're doing. It might not be deep tech, right? So some of the best companies we've seen, we've got a great one on our accelerator right now called Bluefish. They've recognized a need in the Southeast Asian market, because all these cyber training videos, etc. you get, which nobody seems to do in corporates anymore. They're always some American accent, some American version of it. They've recognized a really good need, big need here, to develop this training for the Southeast Asian market. It's incredible. If you always think cybersecurity is deep tech, right? It is to an extent, but on the other side, it's totally not. These are just basic training modules that can be applied for 65-year-old little old ladies in Singapore who are getting scammed all the time. The market for, the number of these people who get scammed. So it's really low tech, really low touch, but making a real difference to people's lives.
Fascinating. I don't understand cybersecurity enough, so help me out here. First of all, let's talk about what it is and what it isn't. So there may be some misconceptions about what it is, right? You must face this a lot, right? And a part of that is educating the market. Because the second part of my question is that in Southeast Asia and Singapore as well, because, if you were to go back to the US, it's a lot more evolved, isn't it? Because there's many more parties involved, there's a lot more funds available. Here we're sort of more at the cutting edge of cybersecurity in terms of the accelerators as well. So tell me a little bit, help me understand as well what cybersecurity is, and also where we are that as a vertical sector here in Singapore.
Shall I take this one? So you come probably to the crux of the problem with cybersecurity here, because people really, really struggle. And it goes from, it is a broad church. It goes from creating training videos for those 65 plus little old ladies in Singapore who are getting scammed, all the way across through to people interrogating deep space and using that to interrogate the dark web. It touches everything we do today is digitalized, right? There's software solutions, there's hardware solutions. It is absolutely so broad, right? It can be, there are 51,000 ships out there who sail around Singapore, or those big ocean liners who sail over there. Those ships use really, really old Windows or NT technology, right? They are so exposed to cyber hackers, right? So it can go to finding, if one of those ships stops for a day, they lose $1 million, $1.5 million at the drop of a hat. They cannot even get cyber insurance today, right? Because nobody knows how to insure those ships. So there's solutions, let's say in the shipping example, let's just say simple ways of training the sailors. There are only 18 to 20 people who run those ships, training them. 1. 2, ways of securing those old computers that are based on board. 3, there's solutions that can be, back at base to monitor, check, a security operations overview of what's happening on those ships. And then there's obviously the one trying to work out some form of insurance for that. So hopefully that's given you a view. It goes all the way from training through tech solutions, hardware solutions, particularly to protect it, as well as the insurance on the financial side of it. But what you touch on there, people not understanding what cybersecurity is, that's what makes it so very difficult for a lot of early stage startups. So, I've come from the fintech, insurtech background. It's really, really easy to explain to somebody how an app works, a payment app or whatever, and that's when people think of fintech startups. That's what they think a lot of the time. So it's easy for them to get investment. But if you're an investor and you want to invest in something like cyber, immediately you think, whoa, I need deep tech knowledge. I need to do really, really deep tech due diligence because I don't understand it. So if those early stage, which is often family offices, friends, fools, etc., they're very reticent to put money into those early stage startups, which is a really vicious cycle because those startups, it takes them, it's a lot harder to sell a cybersecurity solution into a big company than it is to sell a payment solution or a banking solution, etc. It's just the cycle to sell it just takes so much longer. So you couple with that long sales cycle with the fact that you can't get money at the early stage, means that valley of death, as we talk about, or chasm of doom, a lot of startups, it's like 9 to 12 months. For cyber, it's double that.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point, which is if I was a fintech startup, it would be a lot easier for me to go to early stage angel investors or even a micro fund here in Singapore because they're out there and raise the money to, get 9, 12 months runway to get an MVP out, then maybe I can talk to the big companies, right? And maybe get a couple of deals there, right? Yeah, with cyber, you mentioned because the technology involved that maybe those early stage investors have to be specialists, right? Yep. They have to have that sort of information available to them to do the due diligence on a specific startup. So is that a catch-22? How do we sort of move that forward? Are they out there, those angel investors? Are they... you kind of want those exits to come back through into the ecosystem, don't you? Like, yes. I'm a second generation angel rather than a family office guy looking for 12% return, right? So
exactly, and it's really interesting when you mention the 12% because that's a story you see all the time. I want to put my money in, we get 12% out by the end of the year. The exits are 7-8 years away, right? You can make a lot more money, but the exit's long.
Yeah.
But you're right, it is a vicious circle. But what we're trying to do here is, there's a huge part of what we're doing here in Singapore across the last year in terms of educating the general population. So as a great example, and it's hot off the press. So last night we had our launch party for our second accelerator. So we actually had a panel of, a guy who used to work for, the Dutch intelligence service. So he spent time in Basra and places like that. He worked, he ran Palantir here in Southeast Asia, as well as, the chief investment officer from Fund Singapore, right? As well as a guy who works for HSBC. So these are big players, right? In a panel, explaining to the community who is here. And we had I think we stopped the RSVPs when we got to about 90 people. Explaining to them why, what are the nuances, why it's difficult for these companies, etc. And then our startups would pitch to them, just a 90-second pitch, and then they could discuss them with them. But we also, so in the beginning of April, we're having a special kind of, I don't want to call it education system, because that session, because that just sounds a bit nebulous, but actually sitting down with the angels here, sitting down with the early stage investors here, just to explain, because there are some fantastic returns obviously in cyber, and a lot of the cyber companies are going big. And yeah, in Singapore, it's now the 6th pillar of defense. It's massive all over the world, right? So there's a lot of money to be made in cyber for investors. So what we're trying to do is get them involved. I mean, Nicole's got, I think, 150 mentors who come in and talk to our accelerators, of which they're probably 40, 50 now VCs, etc. In fact, I just came from, before this meeting, I was talking to an early stage fund setting up, explaining to them all the intricacies, etc. And they were desperate for people to work with them, a horizon scan and find companies to invest in, because it's hard to find companies to invest in, and then B, as you say, do the due diligence on those companies.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you're doing here. I mean, it's a challenge, right? But you're right. I mean, as a space, there's no doubt. I mean, if you were to look at the comparisons and you go to the US or even Europe, there's plenty of money there in cybersecurity, sorry. Yet here we're sort of like a bit behind the curve and we're catching up a little bit. And maybe one of the missing elements that we're kind of waiting for, and it's just a matter of time, is like the success case studies, right? And what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the ones that have come through your program as well, because they are the rising stars of the ecosystem as well. But, even if we were to forecast forward, I mean, if you were in e-commerce now in Southeast Asia, it's easier to raise money than it was 6 or 7 years ago. Because those trails have been blazed by the Lazadas and all these kind of people in the world. That's now easy for somebody to see the return they're going to get with an investment. Where are we with cybersecurity, specifically in Southeast Asia as well? Do we have any sort of like shining lights out there who are sort of close to large exits?
So, once again, Graham, it's a really, really good question. The short answer is they're very, very few.
Yeah.
So when Nicole runs her boot camps or runs her accelerators, one of the key things she does on every single one of those accelerators is get 1 or 2 what we call founder stories. So people from like Viki or Apvera or Harangi, to come in and stand up and say, I'm a the North Pole. Yeah. We've done North Star. We've done this, etc. This is the problems we went through to inspire people. But in Southeast Asia, if you can find me 10 cybersecurity startups who've done it, I've been impressed.
Yeah.
But that said, and I love telling this story on our because for Nicole and I, these companies, I mean, they're almost our little babies, right? I mean, we cry when they lose a deal, we cheer when they get a deal,
you're
right?
On board emotionally.
We're emotionally on board.
Yeah.
We're not even. Yeah. But we had a company. We had, as Nicole was saying, we had 5 companies come through our last accelerator, right? We started small for the first one. We got 10 for our second one. But one of the companies that came through our first one was Sockview. They're an Indian-based company. They were hungry and they worked hard. Yeah. These guys flew over, away from their wives and kids for 3 months, right? Which is tough, right? They were both family guys, etc. Really, really lovely guys. In October last year, these guys could not pay their gas bills here in Singapore, right? That's how kind of they got down to the wire, but they believed in what they were doing. Both of them experienced guys, 15 years, blah, 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 in industry, etc. They pitched at our demo day here on the 15th of October last year. Wavemaker here in Singapore saw them and thought, wow, these guys are good. We then flew them to London, where they pitched in the London, the Cylon London demo day. Yep. Thanks, Nico. And a big VC there, Crane, saw them, loved them, right? That company today, and I think I mentioned a little earlier, they're on a plane actually to RSA in San Francisco at the moment. Once again, they're going to pitch there. But those 2 founders who in October last year couldn't pay their gas bill, today are worth $5.5 million US. That's what they come to. And it sounds really cheesy, right? But those are the reasons. That's the reason why we do this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a fantastic. Yeah. But just back to of the other 5 companies who were on that accelerator, 2 of them now have raised decent amounts of money as well. So it's not all bleak out there. There are role models. Things are moving forward, and I would bet the house on the 10 that Nicole's got on her accelerator now. A number of those I would personally want to invest in.
So let's talk a little bit about SOCView and SOCView, if you are watching this or listening to this, congratulations on the journey. Shame you couldn't join us, but maybe that's a future episode as well. But, it takes the story, and we all learn through story, don't we? And, we make change in our life when we hear a story. It's a seed planted in our head, and it makes things possible, right? So now that SOCView are one step ahead of your next batch as well, they've sort of opened that up, possibility for this new batch coming through. Yeah, I can do this as well, and I know the pathway. I may have to jump on a plane and go to London, and, I may have to do this, I may have to take it right to the wire, and maybe I won't eat today, or maybe I'll eat Maggie noodles for the next week. But this is the reality, right? Because they can see the outcome and the upside as well. Tell me a little bit about the people behind SOCView. Like, what was it about them? Because it was a lot harder for them to raise funds than it would be, let's say, if they were maybe in blockchain. They had the flavor of the month. What was it about them and their personalities that particularly impressed you? What do you think they had?
I think Jay is an amazing founder because he's very disciplined, very hungry, and also, most importantly, very humble. So when he came on the program, I think he had one US customer at that point in time. By the end of 3 months, he built up a really big pipeline of POCs in Singapore and in India of about 1.8 million USD. And I think what set him apart is that the tenacity, the discipline to come to work at 7 a.m. in the morning, even though he has calls at 2 a.m. at night in the US. And the fact that whoever he met, he was always so humble and willing to learn. Every person he met, so during the program, we bring about 80 to 100 mentors who come in to work with the startups, either from buy-side corporates or potential investors or people who have, experience of sales and marketing, for example. I think Jay took each and every opportunity to really listen, learn, and tweak every little bit of advice that comes his way. So that's why I think Jay's a really strong founder.
Yeah. Those are great qualities, aren't they?
So in the kind of cyber, I don't know your experience, Graham, but in the startup world, we always use that, you back the jockey, not necessarily the horse.
Absolutely.
Because, they pivot, they change, etc. And I think Nicole kind of touched on really good. Jay was... He still is, he's humble. People really liked him. People really trust him. But he would adapt. He would listen. He would change. He would pivot. And I think really his hard work and that ability of his was just fantastic.
Yeah, those two characteristics alone, that ability to listen, and importantly, listen to the right people, because there's a lot of advice out there that can take you in the wrong direction. So you've got to have a strong North Star, right? And also hustle. How much we underrate that skill in the startup world, that technology doesn't sell itself, does it? You've got to get out there. You've got to beat the path to the
You've got to kiss 100 frogs, as we say here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to kiss them.
Yeah, get over it.
But one of the deep joys, and the stats, I don't have them at hand, but one of the deep joys, I'm not trying to sell an accelerator here, because you know accelerators as well as I do, but one of the deep joys of an accelerator is it's really hard, if you're not an accelerator, to meet an investor, meet a company to buy. But you get somebody like Nicole, who will bring you 80 to 100 across 12 weeks, who will be in these drop-in sessions, in mentoring mornings. And then, of course, you've got like the 90 or whatever we had last night for the launch party, 150, 160 will be the demo days. That's the joy of an accelerator. And I'll, be an advocate for accelerators in any domain, anywhere in the world, because that's what they bring these startups. As long as they're not, taking their face off and trying to take 10% equity or something stupid like that.
So, this is what I want to ask you about that, because you have access to a lot of ideas and people who are pitching you to get onto your accelerator, or people who come to your boot camp who may be at that very sort of early stage as well. So you are subject to a lot of noise. That's just part of it, right? So, everybody's got the next big thing, and you don't have time to go through all the pitch decks. You've just got to take people on what they're saying to you right here, right now, and so on. And I think this is a part of the ongoing conversation about the startup ecosystem here in Asia, and a part of this tour is that, what is it that you look for in those startup founders at that early stage? I was talking to Vinny Laurier from Golden Gate about this, and he said that effectively his job is pattern recognition. Is that, he sits across from thousands of pitches, whether it's, email or, an introduction or somebody here physically, and just getting very good at recognizing those qualities fast. We talk a lot in the startup ecosystem about passion, but I feel that passion is just a ticket to get to the game, right? That doesn't win or lose the game. It's passion gets you the playing field, right? What happens next is really those qualities. We had a good interview with the Antler guys as well, and Magnus from Antler. He was like, I look for, I won't do his Norwegian accent, the spike.
The spike. Is that the spark?
The spike. No, the spike.
The spike.
I mean, he's an ice climber.
Oh,
so
got you.
It's the spike in the personality. If you took the bell curve of personalities, they're sort of real strong entrepreneurs are sort of at that edge, the fringes of personality, of social acceptance, if you like. What about you? You've sat across from a lot of founders, from a lot of people trying to make their dreams reality. What do you identify and you say, okay, I haven't seen, you said the jockey, not the horse. What is it you look for the jockey? Because in horse racing, it's obvious they're small, right? So, an Irish accent, right? But in founders, what is it, right? What do you look for?
It's interesting. So when we look at startups, and Magnus's point about the spike, that's very difficult when you go cross culture as well, right? Particularly because you're right, you're using an Anglo-Saxon view, you could go for the spike and you kind of pick up the spike. But coming to Southeast Asia, that's a very different story. Because you wouldn't have thought somebody like Jay has got spike from Sockview, right? He's a very humble guy. He speaks really quietly, very calmly, etc. So you wouldn't have picked up his spike.
Absolutely.
So you've got to be really, really careful with that one, I'm a brash kind of Aussie, blah, blah, blah. You kind of, you could think, oh, he's going to be spiky, but I might be just useless.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a damn good question. And we work exceptionally hard when we do our outreach. One of the things we do is we have massive outreach. We're lucky. We're standing on, Cylon UK, who's been around for 4 or 5 years, got deep, the founders, one was with Cameron, one was with Blair, their security advisors, right? So they're massive experience in the cyberspace, right? So we kind of look for probably 4 things. We look at the product. Is it a smart product? Is it just stupid? Is there a market for the product? We look at the founder and his or her team and how they work together. And then we kind of, the 4th leg to the stool is we kind of see how they could fit in with the rest of the cohort. Because these guys learn so much of each other. You look out there on the left, they're hundreds of years experience. At least 4 or 5 of the 10 companies out there have started a company, sold it, done well out of it, right? And as they can work with each other, learn from each other, that's really, really important. It's much like a job interview, I suppose. You see thousands of them. We have a very complicated ranking system before that 7 or 8 people, entrepreneurs in residence who've got 30, 40 years, will rank them on those 4 characteristics. Then they come into an interview. We go for the chemistry, we go for the personality. We do look for a spike, the person, the passion, the drive, almost the hunger. But it is tough, and we do get it wrong, right? Of
course.
Of every 8.
Absolutely. You have to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you have to, because you're dealing with human beings, right?
But the interesting thing is, I found, and look, I haven't been around 100 years, but I'm finding, the more of these guys I work with, most people who at a post-MVP stage, who've given up their jobs, who get through to being on to an accelerator, right? They must have an 8, 9 out of 10 chance of being a success if you can just help them. If you can link them with the correct people, right? I mean, I know I sound like some kind of Jesuit priest really believing in the startups, but if you've given up your day job where you were earning, in Singapore, 300-400 grand a year, right? You're prepared to give everything up to build your product, etc., etc. You've demonstrated a huge amount of passion, drive, etc.
Yeah, I'm sort of pausing to think about that, because there's an interesting theme, isn't it? When you talk about Sockview and Jay, they gave up something to come here. And to get off your ass, to fly, I know it's the same continent, but, to come to a different place in the world, and to, from moving from India to Singapore is not cheap, right?
No, it's
do not
incredibly expensive.
Want to come here unless you are on a good expat package. There's challenges, so you've got to make sure that you are, in the right place, doing what you really care about, right? And, you may end up eating the Maggi noodles for several weeks, right? So they gave up a lot. They sacrificed a lot. And then you mentioned the other examples, these people like with the MVPs who you think with 8 to 10, 80 to 100% chance of success, they've also given up a career.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's a very emotional decision, right? If you were a very successful, CTO or IT manager, you could have done that for the next 20 years and just sailed off into the sunset, right?
And we had a great example here, actually, just before this previous cohort of a Singaporean-based company, great hardware, and we really believed in this company, right? And the two founders, and one of them was, so it's on the back of some deep IP that the company has been around for a long time. So really good IP, good hardware. But there was this kind of typical like techie older guy, and he'd hired a younger guy to be his face, his marketing, to do the kind of shiny people, happy people kind of stuff. But the shiny happy people kind of guy, he'd walked away from a 300 plus job, 300, 350. And you could see the doubt in his eyes building up as he went towards this accelerator. He'd only given it up about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And the week or 2 days before the accelerator, he dropped out. He just didn't have that, whatever you're talking about, the giving it up to do it. And you would have thought, you come on the accelerator, you're living in Singapore already, coming on for 12 weeks, you're going to go through a startup MBA in real depth, meet like 80 to 100 people, have these great events. All you've based on deep IP already. You would have thought it's quite compelling, but he didn't have it. He couldn't give it up, and he had to go back to.
So if I was a startup founder, and I have a couple of options here. If I was sort of really early stage, maybe I have a day job and I'm exploring, or maybe I'm sort of like developing some IP of, maybe I'm in education and I've been researching something that I think has commercial potential. You have your boot camps where you can kind of like just explore.
Yes.
If I'm later stage and, I'm now ready to commit, and I come here and I sit with you, Nicole and Anton, and say, look, this is where I am. I want to make this happen. It's a great idea. I need your help. I'm probably less strong on the commercial side than I am on, the technology and the intellectual side. What do you want to see there? Like sitting in this chair, what do you want to see? Where do you want them to be in their development stage? Do you want them to be purely at the idea stage? Do you want them to have an MVP? What are sort of prerequisites to make this sort of interface between them and you really work?
Do you want?
I'll take that one. So normally when we see founders in Singapore, one of the key things we look out for is the founding team. Because this accelerator is going to be quite intense, we usually take teams of 2 people and above, and they usually have an MVP in place.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of angel funding or some skin in the game as well as founders. But most importantly, they need to know why they're choosing this accelerator, because there's so many out there. We specialize in cybersecurity. So you're really here just to grow your product market fit, making sure that you get access to the right people. And also on our end, I guess we also look at, whether they had the right chemistry and the right hunger and the drive to go ahead. Like Anton mentioned, the person who gave up halfway didn't have that spark, which was something that we need to see in you to be on board.
So we'd kind of be post MVP, as Nico was saying. So you've got to have a product, you getting input from customers, etc., as to how the product's doing, but you'd probably be at seed or pre-Series A.
Right.
You're looking for $1 million, $1.5 million US to scale your business, grow it, etc. And you've got 1 or 2 customers. They might be paid, might not. You've got a bit of runway to keep you alive. That's what we'd be looking for.
If they haven't yet pitched friends and families, or fools, as you said, would you consider them? Would you think that would you need some kind of validation at that point before you took them on?
I mean, I think we probably would take them on. Yeah, if they've got an MVP, they don't have to have pitched to fools, friends, and family, right? And one of the first things we always say to these guys is, don't invest your own money. Yeah. Because you can just get burnt, right? And we see companies, so we tell them. So yeah, absolutely. Quite a number of them will have family or an uncle. They often have an uncle who really believes in them, really believes in the idea, etc. Yeah, okay. Who gets them going. The old bootstrap, and some of them do, which is always a difficult model. Some of the companies, they kind of do a bit of services on the side. Yep. Or they'll have one of the founders is still working in a big bank or something, subsidizing the other people growing it. Yeah, it makes sense in some cases. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to jump straight in, do or die, do you? You want to kind of, I mean, if you have that sort of onboarding, it can help grow the business long term. I know you mentioned, for example, and there are many reasons for this, but I want to hear yours as well, is that you would consider 2 up in terms of a founding team. Would you ever consider a single founder? Would you help matchmake those people? Because I imagine if you especially came from certain backgrounds, like, for example, education, that you were a postgrad or you were a researcher and you were really deep in the weeds of your technology, you may not know many people outside of your space. You may only be you on your own. Would you consider that kind of person? How would you help them? Well, I mean, often in the cyberspace, the hardest person for you to find is the tech lead, right? Because the nature of the beast, a lot of them are tech solutions, right? we very, very, very rarely go for single founder because that deep tech person isn't good generally at a lot of the other CEO stuff. And if you're just a CEO without a deep tech person, or tech person, how are you going to build your product? So we generally don't. I mean, in rare occasions, particularly in London, we have done it. We generally don't. We don't do matchmaking in terms of, if you a founder and you want to join our accelerator, then we'll go and try and find you another CEO. There's no point for us. We get hundreds of applications. We 4 or 5 times oversubscribed, etc.
Yeah.
That said, on the program, when people join the program, we have people who come in, talk about how to grow your program, how to scale your program, what's your organizational structure, and we do look to help. Let's say the ladies who are training with the training material for Southeast Asia. They need to now scale their product. They use an Indian offshore house to build their product fantastically. They've got their first paying clients, fantastic. Now they're going to scale. And they will hit a hockey stick shaped curve guaranteed, because these training companies do. They now need a good CTO. So we are out there trying to help them link people up. But actually, very heartening for us, the cohort, is helping them too, because these guys and girls are all linked into the community, right? They go to every single meetup, they know the players, and they're linking them up, which is just fantastic. And that, when I said the fourth leg of the stool, it's how the cohort works together. That is vitally important to us. They learn from the mentors, they learn from the investors, but they learn from each other. The one area where we do kind of matchmake a little bit is when we do the boot camps.
Yeah, I imagine that's better.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly, because you get a lot of people with sparky ideas, and you get a lot of deep techies, and you say, hey, it's not quite like America's Got Talent here, but we do, and it works well, right?
Absolutely, and it's a great place to go. I mean, if you're at that, if anybody's watching or listening, if you're at that stage, the boot camp's a great starting place, isn't it? And I think as well for you, the validation is they have to be able to pitch somebody else to join their team. If they can't do that, then really it's not your role to be matchmaking for them, right? There's something missing, right?
Exactly. You need the drive to go and find those people yourself. But one thing I just want to be really clear on, Graham, is we don't. So we run the boot camps and we run these accelerators, which is great. But we're not here to actually make money out of these companies ourselves, right? So one of the key things we're trying to do is build this overall community. So we take hundreds of calls from anybody, and they come in here to meet us. If you've got a cyber idea, you've got a cyber company, doesn't matter what stage, you want a mentor, you want advice on starting, you want advance, you want to link up with somebody in Australia or somebody in the UK, or do I know a mentor at Golden Gate Ventures in San Francisco? We meet people, we talk to people every single day of the week. It's all about the community for us here.
Great. I mean, obviously we'll put at the end of the show the details for people to reach out to you as well, because I'm sure some people listening to this, especially in this space as well, will be inspired to take some kind of action, even if it's early stage and coming to the boot camp or asking a question and so on. I want to ask you then, I think, there's this key point about ecosystem builders, and I'll put you into that category, accelerators, funds, and, all the programs, is that what most people don't realize is that you also think and behave like a startup. It's not like you had the blueprint day one of here's the Y Combinator, out of the box, turnkey solutions for building an accelerator, and you just executed, and that's what it's going to be for 5-10 years, right? Every startup accelerator that I talk to is evolving, and they've learned so much. Even in year to year, they say, okay, right, we started, we did this, we made a lot of mistakes. We now are a bit more focused on what we want and who we want and how we're going to execute that. So can we talk a little bit about that? What have you learned in this journey? With a year almost in the bag, what are you doing differently now, apart from obviously you're expanding the batch, that you weren't doing when you started out?
Shall I start? For us, I think, an accelerator of the nature we do, which is quite an intense one, we have master classes where we lecture people on topics, let's say IP, how to set up a company, how to do a founder's agreement, shareholder, the kind of masterclass stuff. We also do drop-in sessions where we get kind of experts to come in and startups can book time with them. But we also do mentoring mornings. So, and we run, like most accelerators, we have an investments week, a pitching week, a product week, etc. And we get experts from across. And that we do really well. And 100, Nico says 80 to 100 mentors will meet our startups, which is fantastic. But what we've really done to up our game on this one in particular is we've got 4 entrepreneurs in residence now, right? So we have a professional pitching coach. He's not one of our EIRs, but we have 4 entrepreneurs in residence. And we've really tried, we've gone out there because people, it was actually quite easy for us to get 150 mentors, which is astonishing. There are 150 people on this island who will give their time for free to help startups, right? So that shows people really want to help. So we've really, increased our bench press. We've got like a deep technologist, who's our kind of CISO in residence. We've got a deep guy who's like exited 3 or 4 companies himself, also tech companies, who's our EIR. We've got a business EIR, so somebody who works for Singtel Innovate. He's personally exited 7 or 8, but he's got kind of that business commercial slant. And then we have a early stage cyber investor who sits here in the office with us. So all these EIRs are based in here for these startups to talk to at any time of day. We also flew over a professional communications consultant from London, our communications director, just for the first 10 days or for first 8 days. So we've pivoted a lot in terms of, we've got this bench of really talented people, but also right up front we've got like our comms expert and our pitch expert right up front in our first 2 weeks to really get these guys off to a flying start, so that throughout the the next 10 weeks they know their pitches, they know their messages, they can talk to this bench of industry experts. We're really hoping, I mean, we honestly believe that's going to have turned the dial for us.
Yeah. It's good to see you're doing that. It's not done enough in this space, that sort of last mile, which is really the contact between your startups and the investor community, or even, as well, their, clients, and also their potential CTOs or, biz dev managers, or all that talent they want to bring on, which is going to be the biggest challenge going forward, isn't it? Finding people to work for startups who get it, to be, they have to go out and pitch and say, this is the journey we're on, come. So the fact that you have a professional, you've got professionals here who are helping them with that sort of storytelling is great, because I believe, especially here in technology, we sometimes get a bit lazy. We sometimes think the technology will sell itself, when actually you've got to get out there and you've got to tell stories, and you've got to connect with people. So it's great. I mean, I've loved hearing the story of Cylon as well, and what you've done, what you're doing, I should say, here, and what you're building, because this is the early stage of the growth of the startup ecosystem here in Singapore and in Southeast Asia. We started very much with generic accelerators. Obviously we had the Murudis and so on of this world, and they had their own sort of challenges, and now we sort of evolved into these vertical sectors where you are bringing this domain expertise, which is really what people need. I need a specific input in terms of somebody who's invested in early stage cybersecurity and can show me the case studies and where I need to go and so on. That's really the evolution as well. So hopefully this only goes one direction, and that's up.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, 1 year in, it's exciting. So
I mean, that said, we are standing. We don't want to take massive credit ourselves. We are standing on the shoulders of Cylon out of London, who's been around since 2015. They've had 9 accelerators, raised 325 million sterling. So we're lucky in that we can take a lot of those learnings, apply them here, obviously modify them for the Southeast Asian market, etc. Which is a real advantage, because you can go from here, we've got links in Australia, you can go to London, and we've got links in the US, and all those government, and even in the Middle East we've got links. So that really helps, because like I say, we're all for the startups here, we're all trying to get them like this follow the sun model, get them linked up all around the world.
All right, let's put the call out then. How do people reach out to you? What is the best way, and in what format? What's the channel that works best for you?
Well, for me personally, email's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, Nico, I mean, what's your view? What's the best way?
Email us.
Yeah,
email us. Come to our events.
Yeah.
Seriously, or just give
hi.
us the phone. Come in, say hi. Come into Block 71 here, meet some of the startups. Maybe listen to a fireside chat. We do a lot of events.
Yeah.
There's good Australian beer. There's
Right,
good
right,
food.
okay. We're sold.
Yes, you lost me at beer, but
Exactly. All right. I mean, that's a great starting point, isn't it? Especially if somebody says, "I listened to that conversation that you had, and it really sort of like connected with me on these points. I want to come in and have a chat."
Yeah.
It's a good starting point, right? All right. So we are at Cylon here in Singapore. This is Graham Brown. I'm with Anton Opperman and Nicole De Silva. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your journey with us. Any way we can support you as well, let us know. This is an introduction as well for us to you, and hopefully for our audience to what you're doing here.
Fantastic.
Anybody that's in this space, as they say, just reach out. Don't be afraid. Just make contact. Come along. Free beer. But more than that, you've got a whole ecosystem here that is valuable for somebody to plug into, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, this is Asia Tech Podcast. We are on the Pitchdeck Asia tour of startup ecosystems in Asia. If you are an accelerator, if you are a fund, if you're a co-working space, we want to hear from you because you're not the natural self-promoters of the startup ecosystem. So we want to hear about the work that you're doing, the space that you're in, and tell us as well about some of your startups. We'd love to hear about some of your success stories and lessons learned as well. Graham Brown signing out.